Dr. Sonali, I think you are on mute.
Oh, thank you. I think by muting others, I was muting myself instead. Thank you. Again, a very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today. I'm Sonali. I'm the founder director of the Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies, based in a small hamlet in Himachal Pradesh near Shimla. And we welcome you all to come there whenever you can. Until the time you can't, please join us virtually with our talks and engage with us, because we absolutely love and care for the Himalayas. And in that love and care, we started our talks about 3 years ago, where we wanted to bring everybody who is associated with the Himalayas, be they geologists, writers, archaeologists, or anthropologists, and travelers as well. And what this has done is it's created a platform where we can share things about the Himalayas up close and personal, things that we didn't know. I feel that it has brought so much of enlightenment in all our lives. And we've been able to connect with each other more instead of just being in our own world and seeing the world from our point of view. We've been able to connect with others and see from others' point of view as well. And I think that's very important, because it helps us progress and go deeper in the way we think and the way we interact with each other and do things for the Himalayas. In the chat session, I have already put how you can engage with us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course, media is all over, but it's also important to connect, because the younger generation also has to learn. So we have to kind of mold ourselves every now and then to kind of be visible. And visibility is important because the Himalayas are important and the issues that come up are important. And hence, today's talk becomes very important, because Kevin has been in this journey for a very long time. And we have so much to learn from that journey through his photographs. Today's talk is a photographer's 48-year journey in Nepal. And when you wrote that 48-year journey, Kevin, I just turned 48 yesterday. So for me, it's almost a lifetime of an experience that you've had. And I'm so happy that you've come on our forum today. I want to thank Abhimanyu Pandey, because of whom I was able to connect. Abhimanyu is a very dear friend. He and Siddharth, have been working on the Himalayas as well. He's engaged in his PhD studies in Germany right now. So thanks, Abhimanyu. Kevin first came to Nepal in 1975, the year I was born. And he was there through 1979 as an American Peace Corps volunteer, working on remote village communities, water supply projects in Taplejung, Nuwakot, Mugu, and Humla. And I do know that water is such an important part, because even when I was working in Egypt and I was stuck during the Arab Spring in a very far remote corner in South Egypt, a water tank used to come every 2 weeks to give us archaeologists clean water. And when the Arab Spring started, the water tank stopped coming. And we were so worried, how would we get water? We were surrounded by the Red Sea, but there was no clean water. And it struck to us that water is so important, because sometimes we just take things for granted. So I'm sure when Kevin engaged with these water projects, he must have really seen everything so raw. He returned over the following 4 decades to photograph Nepal as a recipient of the Guggenheim, NEA, Fulbright, and Robert Gardner Peabody Museum fellowships. His earliest photographs were made with a 35mm Leica camera with a fixed focal length of 50mm lens. And it's very technical, and I'm sure, Kevin, you will explain us a little more about what lens means and what it meant to have these cameras and how things have changed now, that journey as well. Okay, where am I? I got lost. In the 1980s, he traversed some of the remotest regions of the Kathmandu Valley with a cumbersome tripod-mounted sheet film view camera. In subsequent visits, he had worked equally with digital cameras and the iPhone. And I remember we had this talk, Kevin, a few months ago with a friend of mine who's an archaeological illustrator, Kevin Wilson, who is based in the Netherlands. And he talked about the Britishers carrying these heavy, tripods in the Himalayas to photograph, the earliest pictures that we have of the Himalayas. Kevin's fine art photography is in the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Bibliothèque Nationale, Paris. His 7 books on Nepal include Portrait of Nepal, Power Places of Kathmandu, Mahabodhi, Nepal, and Peabody Museum Press, they were published by them, Kailash Yatra, A Long Walk to Kailash from Humla, Mustang in black and white, and the Nepal Earthquake. He's currently working on his 14th book, The Uyghurs, Kashgar Before the Catastrophe. He can be connected on Instagram, and his website is, of course, www.kevinbubriski.com. And I'll put all that information in chat. So today, let's go on that 48-year journey in about an hour with Kevin Bubriski. So all of you, join me in welcoming Kevin for today's talk. Thank you, Kevin. Over to you.
Thank you, Sonali. Thank you so much. And I was just looking at the screen of who's here, and it's so nice to see so many of you, and especially those of you from up here in the Northeast, because we're seeing the sunshine for the first time in about a week. And it's really tempting to not be indoors at a screen, but to be out in the real world. Sonali, can you see what's on my screen? Does that work?
Yes, very clearly. And all eyes are focused on you and your photographs.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to jump in, and I'll try and keep an eye on the clock and keep my comments and images to an hour or a little less. It's always interesting to go back and look into one's own history and retrieve various pieces of it, and it's really curating how one has been and where one has been, and how one wants to present that publicly. This is an image from 1985. That's Nurki Sherpa on the left, and one of the young fellows from Mangri village up in Mugu. And we're up about 17,000 feet at a place called Yablang, and it's where the communities there build memorial chortens to their deceased family members. And but I'm going to just jump right now and show you some images that interest me. And they're just a variety, kind of a hodgepodge of a handful of images from around Nepal. And for me, photography is very much, in the words of Cartier-Bresson, finding that decisive moment. So here I've got a variety of things going on in the frame: pigeons, monks, nuns, a resting guy checking his email, a security top, and I'm not sure what it all means, but visually it's interesting to me. I like it just on a purely visual level. This one too, this is from Barangsia up in Humla. I know that at least a couple friends of mine from Humla, from Kermi village, are listening in today. And again, what I like about this picture is not the specific content, but just the confluence of all kinds of elements that make the picture interesting and ask questions. The Coca-Cola bottle with locally homebrewed rice or barley beer in it, the masked figure, people with their phones capturing it as well. And then in Rodikot village, Sagar, who I think is watching today, he was with me on this trip. And I just like the miniature sense of chaos in the village street here. All the colors, all the different expressions. There's no, I mean, you could say the fellow in the green and black windbreaker, the youngster there, and the young girl with him are the stars of the shot, but our eye tends to wander throughout the frame, and that's what makes photography, and that's what makes a photograph interesting. Another one also from Rodikot, and I just like the way there's a central figure, but our eye wanders around the periphery of the frame as well, and is rewarded by seeing yet even more people caught in a particular moment. And then, the intimacy of of an e-wedding ceremony in Patan, Kathmandu Valley, not too many years ago. But we're going to jump back now to the mid 70s. In 75, I arrived in Nepal, and there were 20 of us, 10 in the bridge building component, and 10 of us in water systems oversight and construction. This is how the pipe would get to the villages, usually on foot, on people's backs. This is a very large diameter pipe, and as you get into precarious narrow trails up in the higher mountains, it becomes even more challenging to navigate the trails. Couple photos here on the left by Brian Peniston, a fellow Peace Corps volunteer. And we were both posted during the last month of training up in northeast Nepal in Taplejung. And as anthropologists, you would wonder, well, why is Kevin holding a chicken? And I think I was holding a chicken because the chicken was there, and thought it would make an interesting component to the photo. And that's Tej Bahadur Limbu, the mayor or the Pradhan Panch of the village. And then lower right, a picture by Stan Justice. And he sent this to me a few years ago. And I was struck by the fact that I was wearing chapel or flip-flops quite a bit at that point in my life, even though it's winter and we're up in Humla. And I would put on my shoes when it got dark and cold, or when there was snow to walk through. Back in 1977, I was fortunate to be posted up in remote northwest Humla. And the reason I show this photo is, if you can see my mouse, there's the village of Diga. And then to get water, villagers from Diga had to walk down through the village, through the fields, and along these cliffs and down to what was called the Gatte Kola, meaning the stream or the river of the grinding mill, of the mill for grinding grain. And it's about an hour round trip from the village all the way down past the cliffs down to the river and back. By the way, there's now a motor road that cuts through all this that's arrived in the last 5 or so years. This is the monsoon view, nice and green. And then here you see the village again. And I took this picture 25 years later. And you can see the trail again going down, down, down to the river, of hour-plus round-trip journey for one gagro, one vessel of water that one would carry on their back. What we did is we built a 3 or 4 mile pipeline from way up top, from the alpine forests down through the village. And it was all built through volunteer labor. And so that meant part of our job as Peace Corps volunteers was to, well, not coerce, but convince the villagers to get on board, to think about the future, to think about investing all this labor into the water project for the return of community water supply, a shared resource for everyone in the village. And you can see on the left what kids would look like in winter. Very cold winters, lots of snowfall. People would be huddled around the pine pitch fires, and everyone, our hands, faces would be coated with the pine pitch tar. And without water, not an option to wash often. And then this is actually the water tap that came into Choganphaya village, right below Diga village. And Diga being a Tibetan Buddhist village and Choganphaya being a high caste Hindu village, there was a controversy over, well, if the water first reaches the Tibetan Buddhist village and then the high caste Hindu people get it later, is the water going to be polluted? And that was actually a big controversy, but we convinced everybody that the piped water was clean and brand new when it got to the lower high caste Hindu Thakuri village. So I'm still restless with a camera. I'm always going out and looking for what there is to see. This goes back to the 80s when the Vishnumati River still had water in it. Now it's really a solid, almost landfill of toxic garbage. And the beauty of the temples in the winter mist and the Newar merchants carrying their karpans of goods to and from the bazaar. So all of these photos go back to my first years in the Peace Corps. I was 20 when I got there, right out of college. I'd studied photography. And again, I was very interested in what Cartier-Bresson called the decisive moment, finding that moment when everything within the frame coalesced into some kind of order, and yet what was held within the frame hinted at what was outside the frame as well, that larger world from which the photograph is grabbed. The crowd in the previous photo is looking at the king and queen arriving at the Humla airfield. They came in by helicopter, and it was a very intimate setting, actually, limited security, and all of us were able to exchange glances and within arm's reach almost of the king and queen. This is a porter in monsoon up in the Raswa region near Gosekund. And again, I just like the intimacy of this picture, the figures out of focus to the right, so you get a larger context as well in the image. Back at the airfield, this was folks in the Humla area who congregated at the airfield waiting for the king and queen's arrival. And what I like about this is somebody coming from New England of USA is the shared resources. You know, everyone in New England has their own little house, their own car, their own umbrella, their own wood pile, their own yard, their own privacy. And here you get a sense of Nepal's sense of community, how so many people together are sharing the blankets and the umbrellas. This was in Nera village, 1985, and it was the day of the rice planting. And so the mother here is grooming her daughter to the hilt, embroidering the cowrie shells into her hair, which she's just mustard oiled. And the young girl's one outfit has just been laundered, although it's patched, or non-patched rather, with holes, showing the extreme poverty. When I was out there in the 70s, there was 75% infant mortality rates and perennial hunger, which meant in every village, people literally starved. Even with airlifts of government food, there was still an incredible food deficit and hunger. This is what patched together clothing looks like. If there's a piece or a patch of warm clothing, you stitch it to what you've already got, nothing wasted at all. And then up in Mugu for the village elections back in 1978, winter. And I got stranded up there beyond a snow avalanche without my sleeping bag and without my boots. So I learned firsthand about being really, really cold and going through deep snow with cloth shoes and having no sleeping equipment. So it really put me in touch with the hardship of life in high altitude Nepal. Coming back from the high pastures to Lekdiga, and Lekdiga, as Abhimanyu and some others listening in today know, the motor road from TAR, from the Tibet Autonomous Region, China, comes down through Lekdiga now, down to Simikot, from Simikot on to Bajra, and eventually down to the Indian border. But these were extremely remote areas back in the 70s, basically about a more like a 12 to 15 day walk from these parts of Nepal down to the nearest motor road. This is Sonam Giljan's blind father who spun wool every day. This is Chawang Chikep's first daughter who died the year after this picture was taken. Again, incredibly high infant mortality rates throughout this region. And then mourning the death of Sabri's son in Diga village back in November 1978. This was right after the water pipeline had reached the village, and yet there's still this deep sadness over deaths in the village. And just to give you a picture of what life looked like in Gumgardi, this is Dumbara, the Dalit neighborhood, one of the many Dalit neighborhoods in the Gumgardi area. And you see the intimacy of life. These are all different families living almost like condominium style, sharing these porches, these roofs, taking them to the upper levels of the village. The high infant mortality rates, the food deficits, and then also understanding that most of the Dalit families are landless, and so they work as indentured servants on the land of those with larger holdings. In 1984, in 1984, I went with a large view camera back to Nepal under the sponsorship of the Harvard Film Studies Center, and And so I was going from village to village with this cumbersome large sheet film camera. Every picture was taken from the tripod, and it was a real discipline and a very slow moving journey. But the point wasn't to hurry. The point was to linger, to photograph various types of indigenous architecture, to make portraits of different people, to tell their stories as best I could. And Norki Sherpa traveled with me for 2 months in the upper Burigandaki Valley and Mustang and Manang in '84. Then we were up in Nuwakot, Ruswa for a month. And then we did this long 4-month journey throughout the Karnali zone. This is Donna Sheila and her parents. They are Dalit. And that's the home that they're given by the family on whose fields they work. And I very carefully arranged the photo. I put the daughter Donna Sheila framed by the little doorway of basically what's a shepherd's pen for keeping sheep. But this is where the family would live, and the father and mother are like bookends, creating the full frame of the image. So pardon me that I talk about photography. I talk a little bit as we go forward about how I use the camera. These two young cousins were in the Jumla Bazaar, and electricity, mini hydroelectric had just reached Jumla Bazaar, so there was kind of a nonstop showing of the Michael Jackson video Thriller, and it was just so cool to find the two cousins with matching t-shirts. This is Lama Kangri Tenzing in Mangri village, photographed in '85. In 1978, February, when I first arrived in Mangri, there had been a death of a young woman in the village, and he and the other monks carried the body out to the cliffs above the village and went through the sky burial ritual. I hadn't been reading about Tibet. I didn't know about the sky burial, but as one of the males of the village, it was insisted that I leave the village and join them at the site. And it was just such a different way of understanding life and ritual and the process of death. And I've never forgotten it. It was just an altering experience. Back in Kathmandu, the boom was already on of cement construction. Ibahau is a traditional Newari site for worship. And as you see, here comes a concrete carpet factory right in its midst. The forests at Mirgastali and Pashupati there were still trees. You could still walk through there. It was a fine place to be as a refuge.
To make it easier, you can do that too.
Pardon? And then up ritual dancers. This is my homage to Edward Curtis. There was no ritual going on at the moment, but these young men of Limitang very graciously put on these heavy robes and masks just for the camera. Another book I did in the mid-90s, this is The Power Places of Kathmandu, a collaboration with Keith Dowman, a well-known scholar of Tibetan Buddhism. And for me, this was all about having these very intimate encounters with these ancient pieces of sculpture, some of them going back to the Lichavi period in the early first millennium, others going back to the Newari architectural renaissance in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. But I'm working with the big camera. This is at Kumbheshwar, a 10th century carving of Uma, Parvati, Shiva's partner. And with the big camera, with the black cloth over my head, and I'm looking at this image on a ground glass screen, there's a deep spiritual connection just through the process of making the images. And you see the fresh flower petals color and water left by pilgrims that very morning. In this one, you can see that rope incense, and you can actually see the smoke coming off the rope incense and the offerings of rice and peas and beans and the sacred thread and color, marigolds. So these are really deep encounters. It's one thing to do a portrait shoot of a live human being, but these were portraits with the intentionality of the artists who created these pieces of work centuries ago. One of my favorites, this is one of the 4 corner Buddhas surrounding the courtyard at the Quabahal or Golden Temple of Patan. Every time I go back to Patan, every visit to Patan, I go to the Golden Temple and I say hello once again, and I go down to eye level and greet each of these bodhisattvas in each of the corners of the courtyard. They're just so absolutely exquisite that I'm always brought into the present moment when I see them. And then another favorite place is right on the banks of the Bagmati at the Pashupatinath temple in Kathmandu. These are the feet of, again, of Uma or Parvati. And this is a small sculpture, but every time I've ever visited, there's a different recipe of offerings. And I thought all one would need to do to make a beautiful book is just go back to these feet of Parvati every day and make the same picture and just show all the different variations of the way she's worshipped and appreciated. The next book I did in Nepal was produced, printed, entirely created in Nepal. I had permission from Ananta Barsaman Punmagar, the supreme leader of the Maoists, to go into the cantonments after the war and make portraits of all the combatants. The book was produced with Deepak Thapa, publisher, and Himal Books. Norbu Lama designed the book beautifully, and then Sir Samuel Cowan wrote the intro. And I didn't ask questions. I just made pictures because I didn't want to get into the complexity of what each of these men and women had done during the conflict. And so I just wanted it to be a collection of portraits so that a viewer could encounter these individuals as people. No deep stories, no stories of all the gruesomeness of the war. In 1991, I'm sorry, in 2010, I was given the Robert Gardner Visiting Artist Peabody Museum Award, which meant I got a stipend to go back to Nepal. And also there was funding for a book. So we created this very large retrospective book of 250 or so pages. Charles Ramble wrote a wonderful introduction to it. In the introduction to this book, my little preface piece is called Bye to Baje. And I describe in just a few sentences how I went to Nepal as a 20-year-old in 1975 as everybody's bye. Whenever anybody wanted my attention, there's Kevin bye, bye, Kevin bye. And then in 2010, when I was up in Humla in Kermi at Yalbang Monastery at the tea shop, the shopkeeper turned to me and said, Baje, chia khane? You know, Grandpa, do you want some tea? And all of a sudden I was being called Grandpa. And I realized I've gone from bye to Baje, from younger brother to Grandpa. And it's actually, you know, I'm now approaching 70 years old, and I'm officially a grandpa, you know, with my daughter's 10-month-old daughter living north of us here in Vermont. The photo here of the Garuda, behind the Garuda is the Kastamandap temple, which came down in the earthquake in 2015. Speaking of the earthquake, these are the young women, young girls of Barpak village in 1984. Barpak was the epicenter of the April 25th earthquake. At that point in time, these young women would have been much older, you know, 30 years since when the picture was taken. Prem Singh's father with, I don't know the story of the animal. I just know that I got the picture of him and his gun and the hide. I don't know if he was the hunter, and I'm not sure whether this is an indigenous leopard, but I'm going to assume that it is. The coming of electricity is a mixed blessing. You can see this beautiful old peepal tree has been desiccated and amputated intensely over the years. And then the arrival of one of the first televisions I saw in 1987. This is maybe my most viewed Nepal photo online. People just love this photo showing the the arrival of television back in the mid-80s. And then Human Ambulance is a title that a reviewer for the Boston Globe, this photo really caught his eye and he described it quite well and called this the Human Ambulance, and that just has stuck with me. Yes, that's exactly what this was. This is how you got someone from the remote village down to the health clinic, maybe a 2-3 day or 4-day walk away, depending on where one lives. So, you know, some of those photos were taken throughout the 80s with a large format view camera with 4x5 inch sheet film. Total, I probably shot about 3,000, 4,000, or 5,000 sheets of film in color and in black and white over those years. But then in 2016, on a Fulbright fellowship, I was using my high definition digital cameras, but I was also using the iPhone with this app that sort of imitates the way I used to use the Hasselblad camera, the square format, black and white, and then the deckled edge to give it an antique tintype quality. And I just found that, you know, I guess it would be like, you know, whether Rembrandt is painting with oils, one of his masterpiece portraits, or whether he's doing a quick sketch with pencil or an etching copper plate. What matters is the significance of the design, the form, the story, the details. That's what becomes the artwork. So here I'm just using the iPhone, and the capture of these images is about 2 megapixels. It's really tiny, but good enough to go up to about 20 by 20 inches in a print form. Look at the interplay of the gate, the dark rungs of the gate against the bright sky, and then the bright rungs of the ladder against the dark wall. And then just the beautiful antiquity. And, you know, even though I'm using a very low definition form, there's a beautiful emotional resonance to these images. And Sienna Craig, we co-authored this book together, and she wrote just these very almost haiku-like responses to each photo. I love the moment here. So many different expressions, and then Sienna just nails it. Several generations stop to consider what else needs doing on this day. What a treat to work with her on this book. And I have to say, all books are collaborations, and they're lots of work, and they're not easy, and they take time. Working with Norbu Lama on the Nepal earthquake book, on the design and placement of the photos, working with Deepak on bringing in 14 Nepali writers into the Nepal earthquake book. It's always a lot of work and a lot of pleasure. You can't get better than Riderless, The Mare Wanders. Thank you, Sienna. Here's the earthquake book I was just mentioning. This came out last year, and you can see listed all of the Nepali writers who contributed. These are all writers who are conversant and fluent in English writing. We wanted to do a Nepali edition with a whole new batch of Nepali writers, but well, we just didn't get to it. But here you see what happened was the earthquake and its devastation by 5 years later was deep history. And now the question is, how much preparedness is there for the next earthquake? And we see that with what happened in Turkey, you know, with the 1998-99 earthquakes, and then how there was not preparation for the earthquake that came just 2 months, 3 months ago. So my work, when I came to Nepal, I was teaching at the time. I couldn't go right after the earthquake. I got there a month, 5 weeks post-earthquake. The emergency relief activity was done, but the taking down of all the destroyed buildings was really what the work was. And so that became my photography as well, to honor and pay attention to all these young men and women who came into the city to work, to make a livelihood, and to make the city safe again, taking down these extremely dangerous structures. And sleeping often in the structures that they were taking down. And this is the view looking down at Durbar Square. Much of Durbar Square has been rebuilt, however, slowly. Now we're 6 years past the earthquake. 7 years. Wait a minute, let me get this straight. We're in the 8th year after the earthquake now, and still reconstruction ongoing. Look at the rubble of the monastery from Swayambhu, and then your eye takes you out into the city, and it's almost hard to differentiate between the broken bits of colored tile and plaster as it merges with the urban landscape beyond. And this is Anisha Shrestha, who had to walk twice a day back and forth through this ruin to get to her school. But she's wearing her flip-flops, and a friend of mine locally said, Kevin, did you notice in her right hand, she's also carrying her school shoes? So it was just an interesting detail. There's the book. And now we're out in northwest Nepal, Humla. And I want to mention Abhimanyu Pandey. Abhi and I were on a Kailash research trip through Isimode and through the New School in New York. We were 2 of about 16 scholars and artists and anthropologists on that journey. And then we got invited by Isimode and the New School to create a beautiful coffee table book, Kailash Yatra, a long journey through Humla to Mount Kailash in Tibet. And so Humla is a place I've been going back to ever since I was there in the Peace Corps, putting in the drinking water supply line in Diga in 1977. And this is an area that was so remote back then. And now with the coming of motor roads, it's really tightly connected with China, tightly connected with the Tibet Autonomous Region of China. Mount Kailash is just a few days walk over the border, but there's a blacktop road with beautiful SUVs and luxury coach buses that pull right up to the Humla Karnali border of Nepal. And this is Barangsia during their Mani festival, the New Year festival. And there were big questions about what the impact of a motor road coming into Barangsia is going to be. Where are they going to put the vehicles? Where are they going to park the vehicles? Whose land is going to be sacrificed for the incoming road? And these are all the questions of road projects. They bring in all kinds of connectivity, products, agricultural wares, building materials, but it also leads to a drain of young people leaving the city, leaving the village for the cities, out migration. And Martin Sachs has written a really intelligent book that describes this process. And Sienna Craig also, her book, The Ends of Kinship, Martin Sachs's book about the knots and community. I can't remember the title, but both books are about how even though these indigenous communities now are being very much changed by the incoming of motor roads, by tourism, by air travel, by electricity, connectivity, that you can't just look at the community as who is sitting in the village, but you have to look at how the people sitting in the village are connected to their family members and village members now living in Kathmandu, or living in Hong Kong, or living in Queens, New York City. And I know 2 of my best Humla friends are in Kathmandu now, listening in on this talk, and not back in Kermi village. So these are Barangsia. And then you see here the coming of the dozers. Dozer is the generic name for these earth-moving vehicles that rip into the mountainsides and bring roads. And it is an entire mixed blessing. There are absolutely wonderful things that happen with the roads because people can get food and other amenities, but it also totally disrupts and forever changes this pristine landscape you see behind the dozer. And this is right at Kermi. And I'm wondering what happened to that beautiful waterfall that always poured down over the trail, and what that's like now as part of a motor road. Looking back many years. Sonam Tsering was my meat dai in Diga village, my blood brother. And then we visited him many years later in 2016. Sagar Lama of Kermi village was with me on this trip. And then Honda Lama, there she is as a young mom in the 80s, and then as a much more relaxed grandma, 31 years later. And then the shaman Sansam Chombel, back in the 80s. In 2017, when we were talking with him, he said, I am the last shaman of Limatan. We don't need shamans anymore. Everybody's got cell phones. Everybody can talk to everybody else anywhere in the world. They don't need me to tell them who's doing what or what the future is going to be. And it was just such an astute and kind of very alerting observation from the shaman. And then Norbu Wangdu and Tashi Lama in the 80s, and then later in 2017. And I was able to bring back a lot of these photos and share them with people I'd photographed, but I didn't have the time or the language skills on my own to tell the deep stories. So maybe I can always get back there and dig a little deeper and find out more of what I missed on earlier journeys. The Maoists are thriving, and especially when you look, I've described some of the poverty and hardship in Northwest Nepal and the Trans-Himalayan remote regions across the Himalaya. And you have such inequity there of people without land and without food. And you still have a thriving caste system, Dalits, the untouchability. And here you see how women are still forced to leave the house and stay in the stable with the animals or stay out in the cold during menstruation. And so that there was no shame on her part of my being there with the camera. She was sitting out there outside the stable to get some of the warm sunshine on a winter morning while she's having her dalbat, while she's having her morning meal. You see the clusters of the village life in Northwest Nepal, lots of shared space. I remember in the 70s when I lived in Kartibada village next to Gumgardi, I knew everybody's voice. Every single person in the village you knew by voice because you lived so close to them for so long. Maoists were still strong. And this fellow, don't recall his name, but we were in Siana village. And from where we were right then, you could look down across the Humla Karnali and upriver. And he pointed to me and he said, you see that police checkpost? We took care of them back during the war, and basically saying that they went in on a night raid and demolished the checkpost and the people in it. And now he's back in Humla running for political office. One more of these Rodikot photos. When you go to Calcutta or New York City or such places, it's really easy to make, I won't say easy, but there's a lot of opportunity to make incredible images because there's so much content bouncing around you all the time. And so that's kind of what I felt in Rodikot village. The population density allowed for all kinds of serendipitous confluence of content and people. And in Siarna village, a Dalit family, Dan Bahadur here, had gone off to the Indian Army, was able to save some money, and he came back with a very different sense of identity, and was a village entrepreneur. That was the first radio in the village in 1985. And then I met his wife. He was deceased when I went back in 17, but his wife told me the success stories of how their son built a house in Kathmandu and how their daughter has a thriving business in Simikot. And more of the early photos and later photos showing how people have changed over the years. And then more the grooming of the hair, but instead of the mother grooming the daughter's hair, the daughter grooming the mother's hair, and the general uptick in material well-being shown in these two photos. Going back to the view camera portraiture, that I did throughout the Karnali zone, including Mangri, where I'd been on the water project in 1978. Karamaguru and his sons, he was my next door neighbor when I lived with Chowinchikip's family in Mangri. And then later, when I'm traveling with Sagar back to Mangri and Mugu, and there's Karamaguru again with his son on the right, who's a doctor. I'm sorry, his son on the left, doctor, and his son on the right, who's a Tulku reincarnate Lama. And then Chowangchikep on the left, and Sonam Kangri, his younger brother, on the right in the left side photo, and then the reversed order of the two brothers 30 years later at Takli Kola during a Vajraguru week-long worship. And then my real father, Guru Senan, on the right, I'm sorry, on the left. I spent so many days with him. He was my true mentor and taught me so many life lessons. And I spent many a day up in the remote shepherd's shelter under the rock cliffs in Mangri. And then his son, Chewangchikep, who became my best friend. And then Chewangchikep and Sonam of Mugu. When I finished Peace Corps in 1979, we made an extremely illegal, very long 3-month trek from Mugu across on the Tibet-Nepal border for 10 days between villages till we dropped down into Popa, going over 18 to 20,000 foot passes, walking through snow, and ending up in a place called Dolpo, a place made well known by Peter Matheson's book, The Snow Leopard. There we are walking across the snowfields up between 19, 20,000 feet. And then Rob Fodorich, my buddy on this trip, took this picture of Sonam Chowangchikep and me playing air banjos up at about just down from the 20,000 foot pass on Daldong. And then on the left, the Lama Karma Renjin, who took us on the long pilgrimage route around Crystal Mountain, around Shea Mountain. And then last summer, I met his son. And I was able to show everybody my earlier photos from the 70s of Dolpo by way of my phone. And people were quite thrilled. There's Tenzin Gyaltsen with the really wonderfully groomed hair and his grandparents on the rooftop of their village in Bijer. And then last summer, by chance, I met his son and his wife. Yes, that's my husband, Tenzin Gyaltsen, the Lama of Bijer. And then his son, Palden, saying, yes, my father. He's very sick now in Kathmandu. So there's this incredible sense of connection over the 43 years. And then Tata village, which is a real tiny hamlet, not quite on any main walking route. And people are just ecstatic to see these old photos of who they were 43 years earlier. And that's who I was 43 years earlier with Rob Fodorich. Rob, what a wonderful friend and what a courageous guy to join me and make that pretty dangerous walk throughout Dolpo way back when it wasn't very legal at all. And then that's me with people from Tata village and the picture taken by Sonam Lama of the Nupri region, Upper Gorkha. This may become another work in print, looking back at the Dolpo Journal from 1979, and then the newest version of the Dolpo Journal 2022, all by iPhone. And here's my last image. Onward, Tsering Lamu Lama with her son Senge in the orange hat on her back on the front horse there. And then Gyemtso Rokaya of Ringmo village leading Rodney Jackson on the horse further down the mountain. Rodney Jackson started the Snow Leopard Conservancy, and it was Rodney who headed our group back in 2022. There were 5 of us: Steve Leclerc, Bill Carmine, Brian Peniston, also with the Snow Leopard Conservancy, and Rodney Jackson. And Sering Lama and her sister are two of the lead snow leopard researchers now. They are of Ringmo Village, and they are back there now, continuing with the snow leopard research and working with the communities to find a sustainable way for the people of Dolpo and the snow leopards of Dolpo to coexist into the future. And I'm going to go off of screen share now. Thank you, and ready for questions too.
Just a second. Yeah, here I am. Kevin, what an incredible journey this was. You know, the past and connecting people today with their own past and the glow on their faces. It was just so heartwarming to see how you have gone through this and also included the people to be like, you know, so many times we take photographs and we never go back, but you went back and you reconnected and you kept in connect with them. And that's so beautiful, you know, that human connect that you were not only able to capture in photographs, but to bring to real life and to show it to us. It was just very moving. Some of the photographs that you showed, one of them, the human ambulance, it brought back, you know, certain things that I have experienced. I know that Mahima's grandfather, who died just last year, he was a doctor in a very remote part of the Himalayas called Pangi. Now it's not so remote because of the roads again. And I had a chat with him. He was in his 90s and he would tell us about these stories in far flung areas. And he said that he would have, the government would give him a death allowance as a government doctor to go there. And everybody was amazed. What's a death allowance? Basically, doctors who would go there might not come back. So that was the death allowance, because there were these, you know, navigating through these treacherous terrains and not knowing what the future holds. And when you were showing us, you know, the terrain in Nepal itself, so formidable. And for these people to be so courageous and live that life. And, you know, here we are in cities and we are so, we don't even know what's going on in that world. And the problems that people face. And of course, the Michael Jackson images. I remember I used to be a Michael Jackson fan, and I used to go to this dairy, Mother Dairy. I used to dress up like Michael Jackson with his beaded jacket and, you know, and go with my little pail to get milk. And sport Michael Jackson everywhere. And these two young boys reminded me of that. And so many evocative images of the mother braiding the daughter and then, you know, the next generation. So really, Kevin, this is really so beautiful. And I want to ask you, when you went back and you reconnected with these people, what kind of, you know, I know there's a lot of joy in it, but in seeing them, you know, whether they've progressed in life or, you know, their condition now, how has it impacted you? How has that changed you? If you could narrate a few of those moments or something like that. You know, I'm sure you've had so many experiences. We would love to hear that.
What's interesting is the connectivity between the Kathmandu world and the world out in the remoter regions of Nepal, and then also the connectivity electronically. So one can actually now, you know, be in touch by email and phone with the remotest parts of Dolpo and Mustang and Mugu and Humla. And so you know, on the one hand, there's this sense of being connected, but when you go back specifically to the village areas, it's just like in America, you know, there's all kinds of connectivity and all kinds of wealth and all kinds of wonderful things going on in America, but then there are these pockets, and not just pockets, but the ubiquitousness of poverty of tough lives, of being forgotten, of being underclass, of being oppressed in America. And you see the same thing in Nepal as well, that for all the modernity, the coming of motor roads, and everything else, that when you go back to these Dalit communities of Northwest Nepal, outside of Gumgardi or outside of Simikot, there's still this visceral, incredible poverty. And for young women to make that choice between getting an education or working for the family or working for somebody else's family for a measure of food to bring to your own family. So there are these generation-old injustices that one finds throughout the high altitude Himalaya, throughout the Tarai region of the Nepal-India border as well. There's just this incredible inequity. And I think when we're online, you know, I post some of my photos on Instagram and then I hashtag them over to Nepal Photo Project. Back after the earthquake, Nepal Photo Project was filled with photos of post-earthquake. What's going on here? What's going on there? What's going on here? Now it's filled with pictures of beautiful young Nepali women in bathing suits on the shoreline of Fewatal in Pokhara, or such things. You know, so there's just this incredible disconnect, and it's only by going back, walking the streets or walking the footpaths of the remote districts or of different places that you see that you are brought back intimately into the reality of what life is like for different people. We can be very seduced by social media and what we see online. And I think that's what strikes me always. Simikot now is an incredible boomtown. All kinds of resources coming in. And if tourism to Mount Kailash is open again, there'll be helicopter flights, maybe 20, 30, 40 helicopter flights a week going in and out of Simikot, bringing pilgrims from Simikot up to the border to go to Kailash and Lake Manasrovar. But in between, there's all that poverty. There are all those people without shoes to wear in the snow, without enough food to eat, without the opportunity to study. And so I'm always reminded of that when I actually get out to the remote areas. And during the post-earthquake, it was the same way as well. Anyway, that's the disparity.
Yeah, and that disparity is it really makes you feel so helpless, right? That it's just so deep that I don't know, to literally have to move mountains to help, right? Isn't I've never been to Nepal, but your photographs are so they really make you, you know, wonder, like, what are we doing? You know, we are so absorbed in our own lifestyles and everything, and there is so much to do out there. And what can we do to change that? Another thing I noticed with the women having dal bhat, even in you know, on the Indian side, even today, you know, the bathing quarters and their segregated areas for women in modern villages in the Himalayas with educated families, where women are separated and during menstruation they can't enter the village, and it is still so rampant even in today's world. So it's just and the women also don't oppose it. Like even in Kullu, where I was, educated women with MA degrees don't enter the kitchen of the family, and they get separated and they don't question it. And it is so deep that they don't even want it. They're so attuned to it, and you see it happening, you know, at the village, you know, at the level where there is illiteracy as well. So you know, you sometimes feel, okay, what do you do about this? There are educated people who are doing it, and then there are uneducated people who are doing it, socially speaking. So if you have any comments on that, and whether you have seen that happening in Kathmandu as well, where people have gone away from the village structure, but they're still practicing such practices.
Right. Yeah, I just want to mention, you know, the reason when I got out of Peace Corps, I thought, well, I'll get a graduate degree and I'll become a deskwala. I'll get a position with AID or this or that, and I'll work on development. But after my experience in the Peace Corps, I just wanted that intimacy of the encounter with people. And the camera became the way to tell that story, to have that, the camera as an equal sign between what I saw and who could then understand what's there. So that, all of this injustice, being out in the Karnali zone, it was so unbelievably visceral and powerful that photography became my vehicle, my way of basically telling those stories. Culture works both ways. What we love, those of us foreigners who go to Nepal, what we love so much is the traditional culture. The Mani Rimdu dances, the Tibetan Buddhist rituals, going to Pashupati and watching all the Naga Babas and Vaishnav sadhus come up from India and all their wild rituals. We love ritual. We love this. We love to be a voyeur of that old world. And what I've seen in Kathmandu Valley is like with the Rato Machendranath Festival and other rituals of the Newar community, they are unbelievably vibrant and alive right now. They're just indescribably full of life, all of these rituals. And yet, you also look at the Kathmandu Valley and it's become a sprawl of nearly 6 million people throughout the valley living in concrete high-rise structures. And then everything, and so the culture is vibrant, and yet so much is lost culturally through the changing landscape, the changing infrastructure. And it's Martin Saxer's book and also Sienna's book, they both really get to these issues of modernity versus tradition, culture versus development. And so it's hard to hold on to beautiful traditions and yet also not look at the externalities and impacts of some of these traditions on vulnerable communities. I take pictures. That's what I do. Journalists are much more engaged, I think, now at telling stories. A lot of my Kathmandu Nepali friends, photographers and people working in media, it's hard for me to understand where they come from and what their perspective is, because I come from America and I take a long airplane ride and I end up in the other. And if you grow up in the other, meaning Kathmandu Valley, how do you get out of that gigantic, very exciting centrifugal force that keeps you there? And that happens to me in America. I barely know my neighborhood here in America, even though I could find all the problems that we've talked about in my own community of poverty and inequity. So that's where photographers, storytellers, journalists have their work cut out for them, especially now with the corporatization of the stories and of the media, to stay connected on individual levels.
Yeah, and what I love about your photographs is that it's not an interpretation that you're giving. It's about the photograph itself tells so much, and the way it is just it's that moment in time that speaks volumes. So that's really good. And I'll now I'll keep quiet and I'll open the gallery for questions. So all of you here, please raise your hands and I can take your questions in the order I see them on the screen. So I'm going to put the gallery on, and here we are. You can put your videos on, and please do raise your hands so you can talk to Kevin and ask him about his beautiful journey. Anyone? Everybody is very speechless, I think. Anyone
I'm
here?
surprised Abdi doesn't have anything to ask.
Anyone to ask?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi,
Walter. Walter,
Good
please
morning.
do.
Good morning.
Good
Boy,
to see you,
boy,
Walter.
Kevin, what a journey your life has been. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I'm just thinking about how proud I am to be your friend going back many, many years. But your life has been a story with your exchange, but all of these photographs that you've done in Nepal come from love, come from compassion. It comes from, the moment. I mean, you are able to utilize the moment to bring your heartfelt imagery to the world. And, I just want to say good morning. It's been a wonderful experience just listening to you and what you have to share with all of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you
you,
so
Walter.
much. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Kevin. Yeah.
Thank you, Walter. That big sheet film camera went all over Nepal throughout the 1980s. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't met Walter in the earlier 1980s out in Santa Fe. And Walter is one of my great teachers. We had a lot of journeys taking our cameras, getting into Walter's four-wheel drive vehicle and driving out into the deep deserts of New Mexico and looking at the landscape out there. Worked in Walter's darkroom out on Rodeo Road at the condo unit garage as well. And so a lot of wonderful journeys with Walter as well, and who knows the Southwest better than anyone I can think of, on horseback for many, many days. And but yeah, a lot of my photographic work, I was fortunate to be in New Mexico in 1981 to 83 and meet so many people who were mentors and helped me learn the skills that I was then able to bring to Nepal. Walter, it was good to see you back in November too, and get back in the four-wheel drive vehicle and go out and look once again at the landscape. Walter took me out to these very special, somewhat hidden landscapes that Georgia O'Keeffe would go to and make her paintings, especially a place called the Black Place. And we were so lucky, Walter, to be out there just last November. Thank you. Hope to see you again in New Mexico.
November.
All right, I'll be out there.
Wonderful. I will take up Siddharth's and Dave's question. But before that, I wanted to ask you, how difficult was it to carry your equipment, during all this? And how did the people feel when you were kind of photographing them, making yourself, be the focus because you are coming as an outsider and clicking? And how does that affect, the point of view of the people you're clicking and, some of those things?
Right. Well, moving the equipment, we were usually a four-person crew on these trips. There was myself, and then Nurki Sherpa was with me quite a bit throughout 1984-85. Very charming, very capable fellow who was very good at talking to people, putting people at ease, and he very quickly understood what my work was and what his role was with my work. And so there was Kevin, there was Nurki, and then two porters, and these would be people that would work with me for months at a time. But they had to do the heavy lifting. They had to carry the foot locker with the camera. We had to carry all the boxes of sheet film, the film holders, pots, pans, tent, sleeping bag. We all shared a tent together, the four of us. And at night, if I was shooting, during the day, I would do a shoot, and then we'd have our Dalbat, and then I'd go out later in the afternoon. And I was shooting Polaroid film, positive, negative. So you'd pull it apart, and I could hand the print to people and then keep the negative. And then I shot a lot of film, just dry sheet film that I processed back in the States. But the sheet film was a way of introducing people to what the mysterious process was. But then they would get the print, and the negatives had to get washed in sodium sulfite, then rinsed several times in water, and then hung up to dry, and then sleeved and put away. And so I would be midday in the tent with a clothesline and clothespins and drying the negatives. And then in monsoon at night, I'd have to be in there with candles because everything was so wet. We had moisture in the tent. We actually had water in the tent. So I had a row of candles, and I would take each negative and I would kind of massage it over the candle heat to dry it.
Almost like a ritual.
And then sleeve it away and put it. Yeah, so it's very old world. And my old photo teacher, John McKee, always loved to talk about that, about how Kevin would dry his negatives over candles in monsoon at night, and anyway, it was true. But yeah, it got into a routine, and it was kind of like a job. This is what I'm doing. I'm carrying this big, awkward camera all over Nepal, and I'm setting it up. And Nurki and I had this way where we would sometimes just put the camera out there in a center part of the town, the village, where two footpaths intersected maybe, and be out of people's way and just kind of wait for people to come along and ask questions and look through the camera to see what it was. And so it was a very organic process. But as we, over months and months, we did get into a routine. And Nurki was invaluable. He was just so helpful. And yeah, it was. People ask the question, why are you taking these pictures? And my routine answer was, I'm with a university and I'm taking these pictures to show the future, what this moment looks like. And in fact, that's what it turned out to be, because, I had this funding from the Harvard Film Studies Center, and the photos now are in different collections. And Nepalis, when the book Portrait of Nepal came out in 1993, and then this retrospective book came out in 2014, a lot of the photo community, especially in Nepal, just were like, oh my gosh, this is us, this is who we are, this is who we were. And so it gives them a cultural memory that might not be there otherwise. They're unusual, these formal portraits. But a lot of people say, Kevin, that's so 19th century. What's that about? But the villages were still in many ways in the 19th century as well. There were no roads. There was no electricity. People hadn't seen an airplane. The only modernity they'd seen was maybe a transistor radio. So.
Wow. Kevin, I think by the year end, I plan on going to Egypt back after 10 years to the villages that I've worked in and all of that. And I've got so many photographs, and I want to meet all the people that I worked with. And I feel I'll be so nostalgic, and I'll be showing them, all the old photos and clicking new. And I hope to I'm inspired by what you've done. And I hope all of us here who take photographs, with the iPhone and everything, we just keep taking photographs. And the beauty of the mysteriousness is kind of gone because they're just piling on the cloud, and we don't take prints, and then we don't look back. And I don't know, that touch and that feel, all of these things have changed with, the way we interact with the world today. So I don't know what it'll be like in the future. But anyway, Siddharth, your question, please.
Namaste, Kevin Dai. So nice to see you after so long. We are, I think, chatting after 2019. I had the great privilege of being hosted by Kevin and his wonderful wife, Flora, at their lovely home in Vermont when I was in Yale in 2019. And it's wonderful to see the red wall behind you, especially because I have lovely memories of being at your place for a considerable period of time during my time in the States. So thank you for a most beautiful presentation. I think it's one thing to have almost all of your books in our library, and another thing to see them being narrated almost as a performance in itself. So thank you. And invaluable observations. And in many ways, I envy you being a documenter of that, of that change of half a century, because this is something that I'm trying to study, as you know, in the context of Shimla, my hometown, of which I have turned into a cultural historian in the last 10 years or so. My question will follow what Sonali just said and what you briefly referred to. As you know, I know that you did teach photography and arts as well as you had studied. And in a way, I too occupy that sort of strange position between being an academic and being a non-academic, as it were, and an artist, right? And this is something that we constantly struggle, both in terms of a practitioner and as in terms of a thinker or as a critical thinker. This thing about what you said, that some people, sort of critique you or criticize you on the 19th century aesthetic or ethos that your photographs may evoke, is a very, very, at least in the academia, it's a very, very real question, as we know. So I was wondering if when you studied photography all those years ago, and now that you teach or did teach in the last recent years or so, are there certain do's and don'ts, especially the don'ts, that I want to know about, that you teach your students, that this is what you don't do, or this is what you don't, is there some sort of a formula? I hope that there is no formula, because formulas never work in art. But nonetheless, given this critical, legacy of how we interpret art of the 19th century, 20th century, especially from an anthropological point of view, where it is so problematic for, as you know, for a white person to go into the East and to, photograph the things. It's interesting because you mentioned the Maoist, the photograph of the Maoists as well, where you categorically said that you didn't want to go into the details of the lies and just sort of made a picture of them. And I'm not sure if I were in your place, I would be doing that, because the one criticism that would constantly be going in my head would be that I can't do something like this. Like immediately, I would be aware of the fact that it will be immediate. This project will be kind of lambasted because it is not showing the stories that are going behind. Whereas your logic is the opposite, and I completely understand that. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what is the kind of criticism that you have faced in terms of this kind of a photography? And is there a kind of a general answer that you have towards this, or not?
What a brilliant question, and my answer will not come anywhere close in terms of deep.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will.
But yeah, to go back, to jump right into the Maobadi book, I'll give you a little backstory about the Maobadi book. I met Barsaman Punmagar by phone call. I was trying to photograph Prachanda Dahal, and so Kanak and Kunda Dixit gave me a few phone numbers, and I ended up with his son, Dahal's son, Prachanda's son, and we'd have a conversation every over about 5 days, every morning, every evening, and he'd say, tomorrow morning it'll work. I call him in the morning, tonight it'll work, tomorrow morning, tonight, tomorrow. Anyway, so at the end of it, I said, well, how about can I go down to the cantonments, and just take pictures down there? And he said, oh, here's the Supreme Commander's phone number. I call the Supreme Commander, and I'm in a car with my friend Santos Rai, he's driving me, and Ananta answers the phone, and he says, oh, yeah, come right up. And so I hand my phone to the driver, and Ananta guides him on the roads through Patan up to a hilltop to his house. And we sat and drank tea for 2 hours, all in Nepali. Ananta didn't speak English at the time. And it turned out that I was talking about being out in Northwest Nepal, out in Humla, and he said, "Oh, do you know Sonam Giljan?" And I said, "Yes, of course. Sonam Giljan worked with me on the water project in Diga, and Sonam Giljan was one of his commanders during the war." And blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so at the end he said, "You know Nepal better than me. What do you want?" And I said, "I want a photograph in the cantonments." And he said, "Okay, I'll give you 2 hours." And I said, 2 hours? What can I do with 2 hours? I said, I need at least 8 hours. He said, "Okay, I'll give you 4 hours." So I was given a 4-hour permission to go all the way to another part of Nepal, to Shaktikhor cantonment. And when we got there, you know, there were guys with guns guarding the gate.
Of course, yeah.
Called Ananta, and he cleared us. We went in the gate, and they put us up in the officers' quarters, and we ate in the officers' mess. And I started taking pictures, and 4 hours clicked by, and we were put up for the night we each had a room with a large screen TV, and we were watching the World Cup. This is in the cantonment, the Maoist cantonment. And then the next day I started taking more pictures, and I ended up staying for a total of more than 4 days at Shaktikhor cantonment, and then to Arun Kola. And so all of a sudden, everybody decided that it's okay to have this guy here. But I didn't want to get into the stories because I didn't have the wherewithal, I didn't have the skills and the time to do that. And the idea was just through the portraits to say, these two are people with lives, and just encounter them on a visual level and imagine who they are and who they were and who they might become as well. And so that was the intent of that work. What's happened in my recent conversations with all my young photographer friends at places like Photo Circle in Kathmandu and elsewhere is this whole idea of agency, and who, whether you're Nepali growing up and you have the resources to have a beautiful digital camera, and you go out to Humla, or you go down to a Dalit community in Hetoda, or wherever you go, what entitles you to tell whose story? And these are questions and things that weren't part of the dialogue for somebody of my vintage when we were in school, or even later into the 80s. You know, and then, you know, in the 80s and 90s, it was Kevin and Tom Kelly and Tom Laird and Eric Vallee and all kinds of other photographers, and Francis Klatzel. And there's a huge community of expats who were having the time of their lives, traveling around Nepal, doing stories for National Geographic and doing this and doing that. There was never any question of anything but getting the assignment and having our name on it. That's all changed so much now. And so I'm learning from the young people. I'm learning from Nayantara Gurung Kakshapati and Navesh Chitrakar, Chemi Dorje, all these young people who are now out there making very important photographs. But the idea of agency and privilege is very critical and key. And I think it's not just in Nepal, but anywhere in the world. You know, if you're covering a war, Jim Knockley came in by helicopter within 2-3 days after the earthquake, and the helicopter landed at the epicenter in Barpal. Jim had never been in Nepal before, but he was the world's greatest war photographer of our era. And he made brilliant photographs. So yeah, these are there. So there is no answer, Siddharth. The answer is to do good work and to be true to what you see.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. I mean, I just sort of, so this is wonderful, the way you sort of prefaced your answer with that story of what happened when you went to the Maoist camp to document it. Because what it does is, I mean, that story, and I'm glad you talked about it. And I think these are the kind of stories that we need to listen to, and we need to sort of, hear more, simply because what it does is, I mean, when you say that you had been given 4 hours, but you ended up staying 4 days. So what is happening there, I mean, from a purely critical point of view, and like as someone who's trying to understand your work. So one of the main theories in the study of photography, and especially colonial photography, is that almost everything in terms of colonial photography, or for that matter, photography as such, is considered to be as an objectification of the frame. Like whatever you are taking, you're objectifying, and there is no sort of, you're solidifying and closing the scene, as it were. But what you just narrated here is actually the complete opposite. It is not the closing of the scene, but it is actually, in a literal manner, an opening of the scene and opening of relationships. The very fact that you were given 4 hours, but the people there felt so comfortable with you and your art of taking camera that they then allow you to stay for 4 days literally means that it is not a closing of the relationships, but actually a sort of an opening of the field. So I'm very grateful that you told me this thing. And I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I hope that you will be documenting more and more of these stories as well, of the making of it, instead of only the photo. And I know that you have written about them as well, but thank you for this. This was very, very crucial for this. And I think I'll probably be using this episode or this anecdote in my own teaching as well. So thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that. And this is so true. A lot of time, even when you're teaching students field methods in anthropology and how to approach a community, and sometimes when students come in, they're, they think very technically about it. Oh, we approach the community, or how do we become observers? Like everything seems to be very regimented, but it's not. It's so fluid. It's when you sit on the ground and you become a part of that scene is when people start opening up. That warmth that exudes of the people, that they're not being objectified, but they're a part of this whole human connect, is what brings them together. And just like you said, the 4 hours become 4 days because you engage with them, not because you want something out of them, but because you are a part of what is going on. And you are not really a part, you are a part, the 2 words. So yeah, thanks for asking that question, Siddharth, and that whole experience. We'll go over to Dave, Paul. Thank you for waiting, and over to your question.
Hi, Kevin. I'm Devanand Paul. So basically, I do a lot of wildlife photography. So I'm also a photographer, but as a hobby, and I do a bit of architecture and landscape. So, and I have traveled a lot to Nepal on business trips as well as for my wildlife photography. But the way you have brought the pictures, that was something very, very inspirational, because the things what you have seen in life, something which I feel that I have not been able to capture that one. So because this genre of photography I've never done. And this gives me the way you're taken the earthquake, because even I was there after the earthquake was there, but the way you are captured, the pictures are quite extraordinary. I simply loved it. My question to you is, like, I seen your pictures both black and white as well as color. So black and white probably at the older time you taken, but the way I saw that when I compare the pictures, I felt the black and white, you are able to convey a lot of good messages that came out very strongly compared to the color ones. So, at this time, do you prefer to stick to color, or do you feel that even black and white is better? Because I'm a wildlife person, so I actually love to do it with colors. So, but when I saw the black and white pictures, I simply loved it. So that's the question to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Good question, and it's a question that goes through my head every day. I have to admit that a lot of what I'm doing photographically now is with the phone. I have the iPhone 14 Pro, which has a 45 megapixel capture. So it's incredible what the camera is capable of doing. And so I'm always trying to figure out, do I shoot with the old antique square format tintype style app, or do I just take a regular picture? If I take a regular color picture, do I then desaturate it to get that boldness of the crisp black and white design element of the image? 2 of my favorite photographers in New Mexico, Gabriela Campos and her friend Tetsuro, she does color, but he does black and white, hard edge, high contrast, bold, and his images jump out of the phone when you look at them on Instagram. So yeah, it's always a hard question for me, even now. there's a beautiful design quality to black and white photography. It allows the eye really just to look at shadow, highlight, shape, form. And when you get into color, you get into all the nuance of the palette. And it, of course, for wildlife photography, you need that to be as naturalistic as possible. But you know, the earthquake book was color. It was important that that was color, to be very matter of fact about this is daily life. The Mahabadi portraits also color. But, you know, yeah, it's so hard. Dolpo, I came back from Dolpo a year ago and put together Dolpo Journal 2022. It's all black and white. And it just spoke more about my journey as a, you know, I use pilgrimage a lot as a metaphor for my life and for my work. I can take a pilgrimage right in my backyard, or have a discovery right in my backyard. So it's not necessarily going to Mount Kailash, but yeah, the whether it's black and white or color, I jump around. My Instagram, for a long time, I tried to just black and white, but then, you know, every now and then a friend would say, "Hey, well, loosen up. What's why are you being so regimented and rigid?" You know, so I don't have the answer to that one, and just enjoy both, you know, and try just working in black and white on one topic and see how that changes your way of seeing in color as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I was told by Siddharth that John Scanlon, you had your hand raised. So I'll take your question before I take Romel's question. Over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, John.
Kevin, good morning.
Good morning.
The question I have for you is to go back 45 or 50 years and place us in the context you were in when you agreed to do this Peace Corps project in the Himalayas. Had you traveled overseas before? Did you have any idea what kind of training did they give you in advance to prepare you? And a little bit about the history of your photography education in presumably in college.
Right. Great question, John, and good to see you. Really good to see you. I think I knew what I was getting into with Peace Corps. I'd done some travel. You know, I started college as a 16-year-old and graduated as a 20-year-old. So I was too young to know much about the world as an adult. But my brother had gotten a job on a sailing ship, a small sailing ship, after college, and sent me a postcard. He got off the ship in Calcutta, went all over the Pacific, went overland from Calcutta up to Kathmandu, and sent me a postcard of a tea shop. And that little postcard of a tea shop from my brother, I was like, where's that? I want to go there. And I knew I wanted to go into the Peace Corps because I wanted to get out of America and have an experience with some depth to it. And in the mid-70s, there weren't many college study abroad programs other than, you know, you could study Italian and go to Rome, you could study French and go to Paris, but there wasn't the plethora of options that you have now as a young adult in college to study abroad. And so I really wanted that immersive long-term experience, and Peace Corps looked like the right thing, and Nepal looked like the right place. And I applied. Peace Corps number one, Nepal, number 2, Afghanistan, number 3, Thailand. And I was very lucky to be chosen to go to Nepal. Training, they flew us right to Kathmandu, and we started training as soon as we got there. They took us out to the village of Godavari, and put us up in a dormitory, and we were eating our dal bhat, sitting on the floor on a dirt floor on grass mats. They got us right into eating dal bhat. They trained us in language and took us out into the countryside, trekking out to areas where we would have practical experience in drinking water supply line construction. That was it. At the end of 3 months of training, my language wasn't very good. I hadn't really gotten used to eating dal bhat as my full staple meal. But I was very adventurous and very excited and wanted to go deeper and deeper. Some of my Peace Corps buddies were not so into going out into they were more Kathmandu based and didn't like the roughness of it all. But no, I enjoyed it. And then my Peace Corps, pre-Peace Corps, my photo training, I went to college at Bowdoin and I took the few courses that were offered by John McKee. I did learn a bit about the view camera up at Bowdoin. And John very graciously let me do a few independent studies with him. So I was regularly, processing film and printing, and I had a deep appreciation for the fine art of photography through John McKee.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the next two questions. Romel, over to you. And bye, Walter. Walter said bye.
Bye, Walter.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks for that lovely talk. So I also dabble in photography. And my very large question is, what makes a good photograph according to you? Now, I have noted a few things in your photograph. For example, a lot of human elements, but even in these human elements, you have mostly left the background alone. The background doesn't really speak to me. For example, in the photograph of the Maoists, the background, they're just photographs, portraits of young men. I can understand the philosophy behind it. They are just normal people like you and I, but the background doesn't speak to me. I also don't see a lot of interplay of light and shade. And a lot of your early photographs are flat. The lighting is mostly seems to be from the front. You don't see that, interplay of light and shade. So being a photographer, these are some of the things which sort of I took note. So the question is, so what according to you is a good photograph?
What a great question. A good photograph, I think the first thing is that it catches your attention. It makes you look, and it makes you look for a while and maybe look again. I say this about all art. It's my own little thing that I say. All good art is brand new. Because every time I look at a good piece of art, it's got that freshness and that life of seeing it for the first time. I grew up in a town with a very fine museum of Impressionist paintings, some Renaissance paintings. There's even a Rembrandt in that museum collection. And every time I go back to a certain Monet landscape or a John Singer Sargent portrait or the one portrait by Rembrandt, they have a Botticelli of the Madonna and Child. And every time I look at those, it's like I'm seeing it for the very first time. It's an old friend, as familiar as an old friend, and yet brand new and exciting. So that's how I decide what a good photo is, or what a good work of art is. It's just got to be brand new every time I see it. You mentioned the flat light. When I was using the view camera, I was going to batch process all the film many months after. And so if I was shooting in bright light and gave normal processing, I would end up with burnt out highlights and shadows too deep and dark to have any detail. So I always used the view camera. This is a secret, not anymore. I always used it in flat light. Whenever there was bright sun, I just wasn't comfortable with the camera because I wouldn't be able to get the shadow detail and the highlight detail. So I'd shoot in the mornings. I'd shoot in open shade of cloudy days or during monsoon. I shoot later in the day when the sun went behind the mountains. So that's what led to the flat light and all of in that body of work. and then, you know, the center placement of subjects. I did that a lot with the view camera, and I also did that with the Mao body pictures because there was a collection of portraits. There's a fellow in New Mexico that I met back in 1982, and he said, "Kevin, you always got that meatball." And I said, "What do you mean by the meatball?" And he said, "Well, the crosshairs. You're always putting the crosshairs right in the center of the subject. You know, the subject's always like right smack there." And I do that, but also some of the pictures I showed you had I talked about the variety of compositional elements scattered in the frame and counterpoint. You know, to me, that's really important, can be as a strategy for successful images, where you have that decisive moment where many different things happen throughout the frame and the eye has to travel to different parts of the frame to take it in. The first assignment John McKee gave us as our teacher was just to the edges and beyond. You know, those 5 words, to the edges and beyond. That was the total prompt. We had no idea where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? And it came around to the whole idea that he was talking about the frame of the photo, to make the photo so that whatever is in the photo goes to the edges and beyond, so that it's not so self-contained, but it encourages you to think about the world beyond the edges, not just the world compositionally, geographically, but also who is that person or what is that event before the shutter was clicked and after the shutter clicked. So it goes again beyond the frame. Yeah, what is a good photograph? You'll know it when you see it, and you'll know it again when it draws your eye and has that sense of present moment to it as well.
Just one point, Kevin. So in the photograph of the Mao body, if there is no commentary or there is no, superscript that it's a Mao body, then it would be a photograph of any young man somewhere from Northeast India or from Nepal. So in such a situation, an explanatory note needs to actually fill in the fact that what his identity is. So what's your comment on that, please?
Right, I did, and again, I worked with Deepak Thapa, who's the publisher and editor for that book, and we did mention the name of each combatant, and we mentioned the district, and we didn't want to give any more details to tell. I mean, the stories, they're, oh my gosh, each story would be as rich as anybody's life story, coming out of poverty, losing their leg in combat, losing their friends, being ostracized by their home community. I mean, it's endless. And in many ways, these combatants had become not anonymous, but their identity had become combatant. And I wanted to leave it up to, Nepali journalists. That book is there. The Mao body book is there. A Nepali journalist could pick up that book and follow it and go back and find out who all these people are. And if I had the energy and the time, I think that's what I would do. Even at this point in time, go back and rediscover who these people are. Jay Paudel, a Nepali photographer, has done exactly that over the past many years. And I think he, I can't remember what it's called, but I think it's called People of Nepal or something like that, where he, for years, was posting almost on a daily basis a portrait of somebody somewhere in Nepal, rich, poor, young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, and tell their long story. And Jay Paudel has much better Nepali language skills than I, and so I, that's why I don't have the long stories. It's just because my Nepali language skills never got to that point where I could do justice to someone's story. But there is a story behind every photograph, and I just didn't deliver that. That's the end of where I went with the Mao body project.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Kevin.
Kevin.
Thanks, Rama.
Yeah. Over to Abhimanyu. And of course, Abhimanyu, you were not here earlier. Thanks to you. He talks about roads and the changes that they bring. So we're really waiting for his PhD to come out so that we can have a view of Abhimanyu's wonderful work. Abhimanyu, over to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Hi, Sonali, and hi, Kevin Dai. Thank you, Kevin Dai, for this wonderful, very panoramic and rich view of your time in Nepal. And I was very privileged and very, very fortunate to share many stories and experiences with you in Nepal, Tibet, Manali, and Spiti. And I think from you, the biggest lesson I learned, there is a world of lessons that one can learn in your company and being under your kind of mentorship in a way. The biggest lesson I nonetheless learn is the gift of being amazed by the everyday. It seems that everything is, you can make the most mundane of things and what people would simply ignore on a day-to-day level, as you make people interesting, common people, the everyday. And I find that very, very inspiring. I think Sienna Craig spoke for me better when she wrote in the comment section for you. I would just like to read a few lines that she wrote for you here. That she initially thanks you for the presentation, and then she says that the attention, intention, humility, and care that you bring to your work, your art, and also the ways you move through the world and across culture is beautiful. It is a privilege to know you and to have had the chance to work with you. So I say the same, Dai, and just thank you so much again for this talk today. And thank you, Sonali. That's it for me.
Thank you, Abhi. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abhimanyu. And thank you, Kevin, once again for giving us this wonderful view into your world of documentary photography and just making us realize that we should just not be clicking away, but a moment to think, a moment in that time that still can speak 1,000 words if only we wait a little bit more and look with depth as to what's going on and capture it. And the world is all around us. We just need to make it more, connected with, our own placement and how we think of the world and how we want others to know what we are capturing. Kevin, you do that beautifully. And if you have words of wisdom for us, in this journey of yours, please share it with us, because that's the thing we always do with our Saturday Vibe Talks.
Thank you so much, Sonali. Thank you. What a treat to share stories and photos with all of you. Dear friends, many of you, and a real pleasure to be connected. Thanks again. Thanks
Thank
to
you.
all of
Thank you. And we would love to have you back, with more things that you're doing so that we can share your vision with our audience. So all of you here, thanks for being here, and please stay connected. You can follow us on Instagram, and you can follow Kevin. I put it in the chat, his Instagram handle, his books, and his website. And you can just connect with him directly. And watch out for more of our talks. We will be having Peter Van Ham soon with his work, with all the monasteries he's documented and a lot more. Stay connected and have a wonderful Saturday wherever you are. Good night and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Sonali.
Yeah,
Thank you
bye.
all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.